Hello friends, today's video is going to be mostly sort of off the cuff. I don't have as much planned and noted out as I usually do. I guess the main topic of today's video is sort of my apprehension about putting my ideas out into the world through these little YouTube videos that I'm doing. The main thing is that I'm not prone for conflict just as a person. Not that I can't take criticism, I just don't want to I don't like stirring feathers, I guess I'll say that. So I typically don't want to do that if I can avoid it. The problem is that on the internet, it's kind of hard to share many opinions, especially philosophical ones, without that happening. Especially because a lot of opinions that I hold end up being quite radical ones. And, so maybe this whole thing really isn't for me in a certain way. I also don't want to look... I like sharing my opinions, but I want to be knowledgeable about the things that I'm talking about. And I don't want it to seem like when I'm saying things on the internet that I'm I might be passionate about whatever I'm talking about and whatever the things that I believe in are, but I don't want to make it seem as though I'm so completely knowledgeable about these things, because I'm not, I feel like we all have our gaps in knowledge, and I will be the first to admit that I have a lot of reading and studying and developing to do when it comes to my personal philosophical and political beliefs. And so I feel like every time I'm putting a belief out there, I'm essentially sharing a very unpolished, undeveloped idea. And so I feel like, well, then I should just not share that idea at all. But to go on the other end of the argument here, in my head, I think that there's something valuable just about sharing your opinion. There's something valuable about stirring up, some conflict in people. There's something valuable about taking criticism. There's something valuable about these things. All of the greatest writers in the world, all of the greatest philosophers in the world did not get everything right. We know this. You can read any book and you're not going to agree with everything that the people are saying. And there's lots of things that these people have said that are completely wrong, even to a silly degree. But it's about the truth that we can discern within their words. And so I suppose what I hope to put out there when I talk about things is not for it to seem as though every single thing I'm saying is correct, but it's just that I think that there is some truth to what I am saying and what I believe in, even though, a lot of the finer tuned edges might not be as polished. Those are sort of the two sides of the coin that I end up falling on. And I just go back and forth because there's certain things that I really, really want to talk about because I feel very passionate about them. But just because I feel like passion can often come off as arrogance or overconfidence, and that's not really where I'm at when it comes to my beliefs. I care about what I say, and I feel as though I've thought very deeply about what I say, but that doesn't mean that I'm set in stone. That doesn't mean that I think that what I'm saying is some word of fact, and I never want it to seem that way, although it's not like people on the internet, they don't know who I am. They don't know my intention behind the things that I'm saying, and that just sort of comes with the job. So far from my videos, I haven't gotten any super negative attention really at all, and the negative attention I've got, I've actually thought is quite funny. So it's not nothing seriously oh God, I've said some horribly wrong thing. But I still worry about that every time I say things and put things out there. I'm yeah, this is a little bit, people might not agree with what I'm saying here. So anyways, in the spirit of, I guess, trying to put my opinions out there, I have a few topics I wanted to talk about today, if you want to stick around. I think a lot of this, what I'm doing here, and I think a lot of the value with sharing your opinions is because, there's no way to refine your beliefs unless you share them, unless you put them out there. Criticism is important. Discussion is important. I like hearing what people think about what I have to say. That's why I talk about it with people. So I'm not here for everyone to agree with me. And I think I need to start taking that more to heart. It really, and so, yeah, I'm just gonna say what I think about a few things, and I'd love to hear some opinions about it. So, anyways, the first thing I was sort of thinking about is, and this is kind of a basic thing, but I haven't thought a lot about the way that gender ties to capitalism, and the state in general when it comes to a sort of metaphysical framework. I think that it's almost necessary for us to move past the gender binary if we are to truly be radical and if we are to truly reject these systems and structures that oppress us. And it's not something that a lot of revolutionaries end up talking about, but I don't really imagine a post-state, post-capitalist future where we have like your average sort of gender roles with things. In fact, I'd probably say I'm a gender abolitionist, although, you know, what that would actually look like in a society, I'm not entirely sure, because we haven't really ever seen a society that's done that in our history. So it's certainly a very interesting thing to think about, and I'm sure a lot of people have done some thinking about this and how it would actually roll out. I think what the gender binary represents is another substantiation of this objectification that goes on within capitalism and the state, where individuals are reduced to these objective sort of things about themselves. I've talked about this on the channel before, probably in my Foucault video, but yeah, people are objectified and individualized within these systems where you are this, you are a man, you are a woman, you are a banker, you are a, you know, like a poor person, right? You are mentally ill, right? These sort of things, these boxes that we put on people to sort of objectify their identity. As we know about our identity, it's actually a very fluid thing that's always in flux and never pinned down to any one thing. It's a very subjective experience as well. And so this objectification, and I think that the man-woman objectification of individuals might be some of the most deeply ingrained objectification that we experience in our everyday life, because there's certainly a way we can see past the sort of you are whatever career you are whatever social standing you are kind of thing, you know. But can we truly see past the you are a man, you are a woman thing? Because that's tied to a lot of very physical things about our being. And obviously, as we know through studies of gender and sex, these things are very, very fluid things. But we have yet to move past that very rigid structure that we view it as in our modern society, despite our scientific and like psychological knowledge about these phenomenon. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and shout out to the Acid Horizon podcast. If you are not put onto this podcast, you really need to listen to them. They are awesome. They also have a second project called Left Hand Podcast, and I think that might be the one I was listening to when I got this idea. But they were talking about children and building solidarity with children, sort of as, you know, socialists, communists, whatever, right? And I found this very interesting, especially as a young person and as someone who just recently sort of has been through school and everything. They pointed out how in high school, you can sort of view high school as, at its best, a representation of almost a like utopian commune, but at its worst it is basically a prison. And I think you kind of feel both sides of that when you go through high school, because on one hand there's a very deep sense of community and responsibility that you have when you're at high school. You have to see these people every day that you go to school with. And you eat lunch with them, you share all of these things that you go about in life with these people. And so socially, you become a lot more responsible as a friend and as a social being to take care of the people that you're with. And I felt that when I was in high school. There was sort of that camaraderie that you don't really have in the later stages of your life, especially getting into adulthood. It seems like people's camaraderie with their friends and their community starts to very much diminish as they become more and more private and sort of focused on their own private endeavors, right? And so there's that aspect of high school that is very interesting and something that we should really be learning from children about and learning from the kids who, you know, go through that sort of thing and maybe trying to adopt more in our own lives. On the other hand, obviously, the administration, the intense sort of oppression that happens within high school where children are treated very much like they cannot make decisions for their own. They're treated very terribly. I also we tend to forget that childhood is like a social construct. And obviously that's like an iffy thing to say. Like, you know, a lot of people who say that mean it in a bad way, in sort of a like, kids can consent to that sort of, like, obviously that's not what I mean. It's in the sense that children are human beings and they can't just be treated as lesser people. They need to be treated with the same level of respect and the same level of dignity that we treat other human beings with. And there are things that we can learn from children, just like there are things that they, you know, take from us. And sort of this idea that children are just like these people who can't take care of themselves, and then you become an adult and you can take care of yourself. It's like, I think at every stage of your life, there's always a level of dependence you have on other people. You know, some children at various stages obviously have a level of dependence on adults and other people in their life. But that doesn't mean that suddenly they become an adult and they don't need help anymore. And the sort of authoritarian rule that adults have over children in a lot of households is just, you know, not only wrong to treat other human beings that way, but it's detrimental to the child. The same authoritarianism that we oppose in politics, we should also oppose in personal life. And, you know, I think I'm one to advocate for a sort of more communal way of rearing children, but that would be in a revolutionary project. I think there are certainly more communal ways to raise children in our modern society, but we're still very stuck in this, you know, mother, father, parents have authority, rule over their children sort of structure that is definitely a detrimental thing and very much establishes this attachment to external authority that pertains to all of our social life. And so really what I'm getting at is, we should respect children as human beings. They should be given the same rights that any other human being has. And that means that they should be able to make decisions for themselves. That doesn't mean that they can just do whatever they want, right? We're still they still need support. They still need people to guide them and tell them what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. But they shouldn't be treated as lesser beings that just follow in line because they're too stupid. You know, I think that children have a lot of insight about the world, a lot of freedom from the ingrained perspectives that we have as adults. They're able to sort of break free from that because they haven't been as pushed in such a certain direction, and that allows for a lot of very creative and interesting thinking that children are able to do that adults just typically don't do. And that's a very valuable thing. So that's sort of my second point, is that children have a lot to bring to the table in terms of the way that they exist and the way that they think about the world. And then third of all, I think that the structure of parents over children sort of further emphasizes this attachment to authority that is sort of the deeply philosophical and spiritual problem that we have, within our society and what's keeping us from, breaking free from our chains. While we're on the sort of saying things that are controversial, I wanted to talk about anti-natalism because I realized I hadn't talked about it on this channel, and I have no notes for this, so I'm basically just saying whatever the hell I can come up about my beliefs on this. But basically, I've been an anti-natalist for a while, probably ever since I read Schopenhauer, which I talked about on this channel before in my pessimism video. And anti-natalism is definitely a very fringe belief, and it doesn't get a very good rap when it comes to it as a serious philosophy. Perhaps on the left, I think it has a little bit more respect, but in general, it's difficult to talk to people about anti-natalism without getting sort of a weird look. And I think partially that's because there's varying extremes of anti-natalism. There's a brand of anti-natalism that's really annoying, that's just sort of like has this gross kind of disdain for life and disdain for parents, that just isn't very constructive or helpful. I came to anti-natalism through a few ways, and the first way is just pessimism as a philosophy. The belief that life is suffering, especially in, I think, to spin this politically, especially in our modern world, especially in this sort of capitalist hellscape that we live in. I don't want to bring children into this world. I don't think anyone should. That doesn't mean I don't value my own life, but I also would see why someone would not want to live here, because it's not good, especially going forward, because I'm very worried about the future of, where we're heading as a human race. It seems like things are really only getting worse, especially in the environmental realm. And so, yeah, bringing children into a world that might potentially be, on the brink of disaster that's just a little bit unfathomable to me. So that's sort of just my initial, feelings about having children. I guess I haven't really described what natalism is at all. I just kind of assumed you know what anti-natalism is. It's the belief that having children is wrong, basically, that humans should not have children. The more actual kind of philosophical take I have on this is that really by any standards of ethics, especially a Kantian one, which I typically like to think that I'm pretty Kantian when it comes to my ethics, I align pretty well with that. It's simply not ethical to have children because you are violating someone's will. So you can make arguments all day about how most people through their life say that they're happy, which I think is some bullshit, because everyone wants to say that they're happy. That doesn't mean that they're actually happy. Everyone wants to justify their own existence. But I digress. You can make that argument, and you can say that most people are happy, most people don't suffer, that much in their life. And I would still say, yeah, pleasure and pain is certainly a way that we diagnose an ethical decision, how much pleasure or pain that it causes. But the crux of my argument is not just that creating a life will cause suffering. That's certainly true. But I think the more deeply important point is that having children, you are violating the will of this individual. They are not consenting to being born. There's no way that they can give consent to being born. And I don't think that we have the authority to make that decision for someone else. And so we shouldn't. I could not imagine giving birth to a child, and if something horrible happens to them, I would feel very personally responsible for that, because I decided to bring them into the world, and they never decided to make that choice. And so I can't really come to terms with that as an ethical thing. And now what I want to get at here is that I don't have some disdain for people who, want to have children. I think that's a totally cool thing, despite what you may think about all the things I previously said. I think it's okay to have children. In the same way where, is eating meat wrong? Probably. I probably should be a vegan, but I still eat meat. And I feel a little bad about that. But I think that the society we live in, we're just not really ready to live as radically as we might need to live. And I don't expect from anyone, if they want to have children, to not have children just because it's technically unethical. I'm not going to have children. I do not want to have children because I think that it's unethical and for various other reasons. But I don't have anything against people who want to have children. I'll just say that. It's certainly an interesting thing for me to think about, though, becoming a more revolutionary society, if that is to happen. I do wonder if more and more people sort of come to the conclusion that having children is wrong. And I do wonder about, is there such a society where anti-natalism is a very popular ideology to have, and no one really has children? Because that society wouldn't last very long. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there might come a day where people recognize the sort of ethical weight of having children, but perhaps that just makes us better parents and doesn't completely discourage us from having children. That's sort of what I really hope, because I can't imagine a society really just fully adopting an anti-natalist philosophy, but I hope that people start to feel the weight of the ethical decision that is having children and take that a lot more seriously than a lot of people end up doing. I'll also say that perhaps it becomes less so of an ethical issue if we come to live in a society that isn't sort of ravished by oppression, the oppression of parents over children included in that, and where we treat children more like human beings and less like property, right? I think it'd be a lot easier for me to be in favor of having children in that sort of world. And so, it's not something I say I can say one way or another. It's still something I'm really mulling over when it comes to my political and sort of philosophical ideals. So even though I identify as an anti-natalist, it's not necessarily something that's set in stone, and I think that it's highly contextual. With that said, this video is, a lot of speculation and a lot of, this and that, and I'm not putting down anything super concrete, and I'm not doing any highly rigorous philosophy, so I hope that you give me the benefit of the doubt here. And I'm also sorry about how rambly this is. I didn't really have any regimented notes for this, so I'm just sort of rambling. But yeah, that'll basically do it for what I had to talk about. As always, I hope you engage with this in good faith, and I will see you in the next video.